Imagine being called up for the final test of a military training, only to fail in front of everyone. What would you do if it were the end of everything, or a new chance? In her case, the truth was hidden behind this apparent failure, something so secret and dangerous that even the instructors feared it. But what no one knew is that this failure was actually the beginning of a mission so critical that no one dared speak about it. Prepare to discover what really happened when failure turned into a destiny that not even the most experienced could foresee. The wind sliced through the air sharply, mingling with the muffled sound of military boots pounding on the unforgiving ground. The training field was a place of tension, where every move carried immense weight. It was the final test, the defining moment. Every labored breath, every drop of sweat, every aching muscle seemed to be the result of countless hours of training, sleepless nights, and unrelenting expectations. This was the culmination of everything. Clara stood there, one of the last to arrive, her uniform pristine, her hair tied back so no strand could fall out of place. Her name was Clara, and the determination in her eyes was a mix of focus and something deeper, a fire that drove her to go further, to push through pain, and to disregard the obstacles that lay in her path. For Clara, this final test wasn't just a requirement. It was the only way to prove to herself, and to the world, that she was capable. She had prepared for this moment her whole life. She knew this was the peak of everything she had worked toward. But even as she stepped forward, she couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. There was something off about the atmosphere that day. The instructors, usually stoic, were silent, their faces unreadable, as though nothing could shake their composure. There was something strange in the air, and Clara couldn't quite place it. She knew she couldn't afford to fail. She wouldn't fail. But a small voice in her mind began to whisper, what if something was wrong? The test began. It was a real combat simulation, and survival depended on speed, strategy, and bravery. Clara moved with agility, her body responding instinctively to each command, her eyes sharp, taking in every detail. She had trained for this moment for months, and now, it felt as though she was part of the environment, as if she had lived this battle 1,000 times before. However, as she rushed to complete the simulation, a mistake happened. A small mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. She hesitated, maybe just for a second, but in that moment, the simulation was abruptly halted. Fail, the instructor announced coldly, his voice devoid of emotion. The word echoed in Clara's mind, reverberating, in a surreal way. Fail? What? Fail? But she had worked so hard. She had surpassed her limits, challenged her exhaustion, pushed through the pain. Was it all for nothing? She stared at the instructor, trying to process what had just happened. The training field, once a place of achievement, now felt like a stage for her defeat. The other recruits were silent, their faces unreadable. What was going on? She had been the best, the strongest. How could she have failed? Fail, the instructor repeated, his tone final, his eyes impassive. But he knew what he was doing. He knew Clara, like everyone else, wouldn't understand at that moment. Not yet. And the truth behind her failure wouldn't come to light. For years, Clara stood still. The world around her seemed to blur. Her knees almost buckled under the weight of the disappointment crashing down on her, but she forced herself to remain upright. She had been rejected. The test had been everything she feared. The failure was definitive. There was no question about it. She had failed. The sound of the wind seemed to mock her, and the training field, once a place of accomplishment, now seemed like a stage for her defeat. Her fellow recruits began to disperse, but Clara stayed motionless, as though waiting for something, anything, to explain what had just happened. Was this a mistake? Was it something in her strategy that had been completely wrong? Or was there something deeper, something she couldn't yet comprehend? It was then that she heard the instructor approach. He said nothing, but his presence alone told her that there was more to this than met the eye. He knew, and she didn't. He was about to show her something she couldn't see yet. What had just happened? Was this truly a failure? In that moment, Clara felt a shift inside her. The failure, the rejection, wasn't the end of everything. It was the beginning of something much larger, something far more important than she could ever have imagined. In the days that followed the fateful rejection, Clara found herself trapped in a whirlwind of thoughts and doubts. Every training, every mission, and even every conversation with her fellow recruits seemed to be touched by an invisible shadow. The failure in the test was still fresh in her mind. But there was something deep inside her telling her that there was more to the story than she could understand. The perception of injustice lingered, but but at the same time, a sense of unease began to grow within her, something that she couldn't fully grasp, but knew it was important to figure out. While she pushed herself to continue with the daily exercises and maintain her training routine, Clara was called for a private meeting. The summons came from one of the higher-ranking officers, a man known for his cold demeanor and unwavering authority. He was the kind of person who rarely showed any emotion, and his presence always conveyed a sense of power and control. Clara felt a chill run down her spine when she received the summons. She knew something significant was about to happen, but she had no idea what. What could be more important than training? What could justify the way she had been treated? The answers were far from her reach, but she knew it was time to find the missing pieces. When Clara walked into the room where the officer awaited, the atmosphere felt different. There was no sign of hostility or reprimand. Instead, there was a palpable tension, like she was about to be told a secret that had been locked away for far too long. The officer, seated behind his desk, didn't look at her right away, as though he was weighing his words carefully. The silence between them was deafening. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice deep and measured. "Clara, you know what happened in that test?" Clara nodded slowly, her mind still racing, with the memory of that moment. The word fail echoing in her ears. But she didn't respond. What else could she say? She was confused, but she wouldn't allow herself to show any weakness or hesitation. "You were rejected. Not because you are incapable," the officer continued. "Not because you failed, but because you were chosen for something much greater. What you think of as failure is part of something far beyond what you can comprehend right now. The truth won't come to light for years, but it's time you know. You weren't meant to pass that test. You were meant for something more." Clara froze, struggling to process the words that didn't seem to make sense. She had been chosen, but why? And for what? Everything that had happened until now had been framed as a rejection, as her inability to succeed. How could that have been part of a plan? The officer stood up, walking toward her slowly, his expression unreadable. "You were selected for a mission," he said, his voice becoming more serious. "A mission so vital, so secret that even your instructors couldn't know. The test was a facade, Clara, a test of something more than your skills. It was a test of your character, of your ability to withstand disappointment, to rise above your perceived failure. You were chosen because we knew you could handle what's coming. The mission you are about to undertake is far more dangerous than anything you could imagine." Clara's mind raced. The idea that her failure had been a setup, part of a greater plan, was overwhelming. How could she have known that everything she thought was a setback was actually part of a much larger design? What did this mission entail, and why was she the one chosen for it? "You weren't meant to pass that test," the officer reiterated. "What you see as rejection was merely a method to assess your ability to endure. Now, the true mission begins." In that moment, everything Clara had experienced over the past few days started to fall into place. The confusion, the isolation, the rejection, all of it was a step in a much bigger process. She wasn't meant to succeed in the traditional sense. She had been chosen for something greater, something that had required her to face this moment of doubt and uncertainty, but the question still hung heavy in the air. What was this mission? What exactly was she being prepared for? The officer, sensing her uncertainty, continued, "You will be briefed on the full scope of your mission soon. But for now, understand this. You were never meant to follow the typical path. You were always going to be different. You were chosen not for your ability to follow orders, but for your resilience. And now, the real work begins." As Clara stood there, absorbing the gravity of the officer's words, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. She had thought she was lost, that she had been discarded. But in truth, this moment of rejection was the key to her future, the turning point that would lead her down a path she had never imagined. Her failure had not been a reflection of her worth. It had been a stepping stone to something much bigger, something she was now ready to face, with all the strength and resilience she had built along the way. After the revelation of her true mission, Clara was thrust into a world she could never have anticipated. The days that followed were shrouded in secrecy, and her training took on a new purpose, a purpose that went beyond anything she had ever imagined. The instructors, the drills, the routines she had been familiar with were now part of a much grander scheme. Clara no longer felt like a mere recruit. She had become part of something that stretched far beyond the walls of the training facility, far beyond anything most people could comprehend. Clara's days became a blur of intense preparation. Her physical training intensified, her mental endurance stretched, and every skill she thought she had mastered was brought to a higher level. She no longer spent her time with other recruits. She was placed in a separate, secret training compound, far from prying eyes. Only a select few were aware of her mission, and even fewer knew exactly what she was being trained for. But Clara wasn't entirely blind to the reality she was now facing. Each day, the enormity of the task at hand weighed heavier on her. The secrecy was suffocating. There were no phone calls to family, no letters home, no contact with the outside world. Her life, once full of routine and camaraderie, now revolved around covert operations, intelligence gathering, and special skills that no one else knew about. The only thing Clara was sure of was that this mission, whatever it was vital. It would affect the course of history, of that she was certain. But the details remained elusive, slipping through her fingers like sand every time she tried to get answers. What Clara didn't know was that the mission was not just about her abilities. It wasn't only about her ability to fight, to think on her feet, or to blend into the shadows. It was about her ability to make decisions. To be decisive, even when there was no clear right or wrong choice. The mission wasn't simply a job she was tasked with completing. It was a test of her judgment, her ability to act under pressure, and most importantly, her ability to think for herself when the world was falling apart around her. The days turned into weeks, then months, and during that time, Clara's training became more and more unconventional. She wasn't just learning physical combat, or how to operate in a foreign environment. She was learning to deal with moral ambiguity, to navigate a world where enemies were not always visible and where the line between good and evil was often blurred. She was becoming a master of deception, a specialist in sabotage, and, more importantly, someone who could make life or death decisions in the blink of an eye. As the months passed, the weight of her training began to take its toll. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that every move she made, every choice she made, was being scrutinized by someone who had more knowledge than she did. She had learned that everything in her life, up to that point, had been a setup, a prelude to something much bigger. But who was behind this setup? Why was she chosen for this mission? And what exactly did this mission entail? Despite her growing suspicions, Clara's sense of duty kept her moving forward. She could no longer focus on the past, no longer question the decisions that had led her here. There was no time for doubt. The mission was everything. And as the final phase of her training approached, Clara knew she was being prepared for something far more dangerous and more complex than she had ever imagined. She was being shaped for a role that no one else could play. The question was, would she be able to rise to the occasion when the time came? Would she be able to make the decisions that would ultimately determine the fate of not just herself, but of countless others? The truth was, Clara had been chosen not just for her physical skills, not just for her ability to survive, but for her ability to make difficult decisions that others would not be able to make. And as the truth about her mission remained hidden, all she could do was continue to prepare. She knew that the time for answers was drawing near, and when it came, she would be ready to make the ultimate choice. The secret of her mission, and the reason she was being pushed so far beyond her limits, was becoming clearer. The mission was not simply a test of skill, but a test of courage and integrity. It was about knowing when to fight, when to step back, and when to sacrifice everything for the greater good. Clara had no idea how her story would end, but she did know this: she had been chosen because she could handle the weight of these decisions, and she would prove herself, even if it meant making sacrifices she hadn't yet imagined. Her training was far from over. But as the days grew shorter and the final stage approached, Clara felt ready. Whatever the mission was, whatever awaited her on the other side, she would face it head-on. The decisions would come, and she would be prepared. After the revelation of her true mission, Clara was thrust into a world that felt entirely different from anything she had ever known. The days that followed were shrouded in secrecy, and with them came a relentless and exhausting new form of preparation. No longer was Clara part of the group she had trained with. No longer was she simply a soldier in training. She had been selected for a mission that demanded far more than just physical prowess or military strategy. It required her to be more, much more than she ever thought possible. She was relocated to a secret, underground facility, far removed from the eyes of the outside world. The once familiar routines of daily military training were replaced with grueling, intense sessions designed to transform her into someone capable of facing an unseen and unknown enemy. Here, there were no distractions, no interactions with other recruits. She was isolated, alone. Her days were filled with endless hours of training, And every moment seemed to push her further, testing her limits. The training was nothing like she had ever experienced before. The drills were harder, the stakes higher, and the hours longer. Each day was a test of endurance, as Clara's body and mind were stretched to their limits. She was subjected to extreme physical tests, forced to push herself further than she ever thought possible, building strength she didn't know she had. There were moments when she wanted to quit, when the exhaustion seemed too much to bear, but she kept going. She had no choice. She had made a commitment, and she couldn't back out now. But physical strength was only the beginning. Clara's mind was put to the test as well. The mental exercises she faced were as demanding as the physical ones. She was taught to think critically, to anticipate threats, to make decisions in the blink of an eye. She was trained to be a strategist, a master of tactics, and to understand the complex psychology of those she would face. She learned to adapt, to operate in chaos, and to use every resource available to her. Every scenario was designed to challenge her ability to stay calm under pressure and to act swiftly and decisively. As the months passed, Clara felt herself becoming something else, something sharper, something stronger. Her old self, the one who had doubted and hesitated, began to fade. In its place was a woman who was capable of handling whatever came her way. She no longer questioned her training. She understood now that the pain, the fatigue, and the isolation were all part of the process. They were necessary to prepare her for the mission ahead. Yet, even as Clara adapted to this new world, the questions remained. What exactly was the mission? Why had she been chosen for it? The answers seemed so far out of reach. But every time she thought she might have a glimpse of the truth, another layer of secrecy would be thrown over her. No one gave her a straight answer. Her trainers, though familiar with her progress, never spoke of the bigger picture. They only told her to focus on her training, to trust in the process. But Clara's curiosity gnawed at her. The training intensified as she neared the final stages. She was subjected to simulations that were more dangerous, more lifelike, than anything she had encountered. Each exercise felt like it could be her last. Yet Clara moved through them with precision and skill, her instincts sharp and her mind clear. She was becoming someone else. Someone capable of doing things she never thought herself capable of. But the price for this transformation was steep. Clara could no longer afford to connect with anyone. Her emotions were no longer her own to control. She had become a tool, and that tool had to be honed, sharpened, and ready for whatever lay ahead. As the years passed, Clara began to wonder if she would ever return to the world she had known before. She thought of her family, her old life, the people she once knew, but those thoughts seemed increasingly distant, as if they belonged to someone else. This new life had consumed her. She had no choice but to keep moving forward. She was on the edge of something, and she couldn't afford to let anything distract her. Yet, amidst all the training, amidst all the isolation, Clara started to feel something she hadn't expected, a sense of purpose. Every day, every challenge, every test was leading her toward something. She didn't know what it was yet, but she knew it was important. Her life was no longer about her own success or failure. It was about something bigger, something that would require everything she had to give. The final phase of her training loomed ahead, and Clara could feel it. She was ready. She had been molded into a weapon, a specialist, someone who could handle the most delicate and dangerous of missions. But more than that, she had been shaped into someone who could think on her feet, who could face the unknown without hesitation. And when the time came, Clara would be ready to face whatever awaited her, no matter how insurmountable it seemed. Clara had become the person she needed to be. The years of secret training had forged her into someone who could take on a mission beyond her imagination. The question now was not whether she was ready, but whether she could handle the truth of what was coming. Clara stood at the edge of an invisible precipice, knowing that the moment she had been trained for, the moment that had been building for years, was finally upon her. The mission, long shrouded in secrecy, was now revealed to be far more complex and dangerous than anything she had anticipated. The days of grueling training, of isolation and sacrifice, had led to this pivotal moment. But, as always, the full scope of her assignment remained unclear. The final piece of the puzzle was still missing, and as she prepared to embark on the mission, she felt a mixture of determination and unease. The path ahead was uncertain, but Clara had no choice but to step forward. The briefing room was dark, illuminated by harsh lights that cast long shadows across the walls. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of urgency. Clara, now fully aware that her role was far more significant than she had ever imagined, took her place among a small group of high-ranking officers and specialists. Despite the familiar faces around her, a cold silence enveloped the room. The officer in charge, a man whose presence commanded respect, stepped forward and addressed the group. "Clara," he said, his voice calm but stern, "you've been chosen because you're ready. For this, we've prepared you for a mission that, if successful, will alter the course of history. But if you fail, the consequences will be catastrophic." Clara's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. She had known, deep down, that this mission was never going to be ordinary. She had been trained for something that went far beyond what any of her colleagues could understand. Still, the weight of the responsibility, the potential for global ramifications, settled heavily on her shoulders. The officer continued, revealing fragments of the truth, though Clara knew they were still holding back crucial details. "Your mission is to infiltrate and dismantle a powerful, covert organization that has been operating under our radar for years. They are involved in high-level espionage, manipulation, and global destabilization. Their influence extends into governments, corporations, and military forces around the world. This group, if left unchecked, has the power to bring about a catastrophic shift in global order." Clara's thoughts raced. She had known that this mission would be dangerous, but the scope of it now became clear. This wasn't just about taking down an enemy. It was about preventing a global crisis. The weight of that realization made her feel the gravity of what she was about to face. She wasn't just fighting for survival or personal success anymore. She was fighting to protect everything that she had ever known. The officer's gaze sharpened. "You will need to navigate through a complex web of deception. Their agents are embedded in various governments, military operations, and intelligence agencies. You cannot trust anyone. Your success depends on your ability to act swiftly and decisively, without revealing your true purpose. You'll be working alone, for the most part. Your only mission is to locate the key individuals at the heart of this organization and eliminate them." Clara absorbed every word, though part of her still struggled to understand the magnitude of what lay ahead. She wasn't simply being sent into hostile territory to fight enemy forces. She was to infiltrate a shadow network, where every ally could turn into an enemy at a moment's notice. This mission would test her not only as a soldier but as a strategist, a master of manipulation and intelligence gathering. It was a test of everything she had learned in her years of preparation. "Your training has been extensive," the officer continued, "but this is unlike any operation you've been part of. You'll need to trust your instincts. You may not have support when things go wrong. Your ability to act alone, without help, will determine the outcome." As the details of the mission unfolded, Clara's mind raced. She could no longer hold on to any preconceived notion of what she thought her role would be. This was different. This was a mission that demanded more than just physical skill. It required her to become a master of psychological warfare. Someone who could outthink and outmaneuver even the most seasoned enemies. Every move she made would be scrutinized. Every decision weighed in the balance between life and death. The officer paused and handed her a briefcase. Inside were encrypted files, maps, and intelligence reports, all of which would help her understand the landscape of her mission. But as Clara reached for the documents, a sense of unease washed over her. There was still so much she didn't know. The faces of the people she would encounter, the places she would go, the dangers she would face, they were all unknown variables, in a game where one wrong move could lead to disaster. But Clara knew one thing: this was her purpose. She had been chosen for this mission because she had the strength, the intelligence, and the resilience to see it through. It wasn't about glory. It wasn't about recognition. It was about saving the world from an invisible enemy that threatened everything she held dear. As she looked around the room at the officers and specialists who would be guiding her mission, Clara realized that they weren't just preparing her for a job, they were preparing her for a journey into the unknown, where every step would be a calculated risk. The mission was not just a test of her skills, it was a test of her ability to adapt, to survive, and to outwit those who would stop at nothing to ensure their own power. And so, as Clara stepped into the unknown, she knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be moments of doubt, of fear, and of failure. But she also knew that there was no turning back. She had been chosen for this mission because she had the courage to face it head-on, no matter the cost. The stakes were higher than anything she had ever imagined, and now, it was time to see if she was truly ready to take on the most important mission of her life. As Clara dove deeper into her covert mission, The pressure of maintaining her cover began to weigh heavily on her. The mission was far more complicated than she had ever anticipated, and the constant surveillance, coupled with the need for secrecy, made her feel more isolated than ever. The very nature of her assignment meant that she couldn't afford to show any vulnerability, any weakness. She had to blend in, to act like everyone else, to keep her true purpose hidden from even her closest colleagues. Every moment became a balancing act, trying to keep up appearances while secretly preparing for the monumental task that lay ahead. As time passed, Clara noticed the subtle shift in the way people around her started to behave. The recruits she once trained alongside began to notice that she was different. That something about her didn't quite add up. Her sharp focus, her unusual behavior during training, and her ability to outmaneuver the others in ways that seemed almost instinctual were starting to raise questions. Her fellow soldiers began to watch her more closely, exchanging curious glances when she wasn't looking, whispering behind her back. The more they saw, the more they began to wonder, what was really going on with Clara? At first, Clara was oblivious to the growing tension. She focused solely on her mission, pushing herself harder each day, becoming even more attuned to the danger that surrounded her. She had been trained to act as though nothing was wrong, to keep her emotions in check and her behavior under control. But as the days wore on, she couldn't help but feel the weight of suspicion building around her. The small cracks in her facade were beginning to show, and she knew that it wouldn't be long before someone figured out that she wasn't the ordinary soldier she appeared to be. One of her fellow recruits, Victor, was the first to voice his concerns. He had always been perceptive, and Clara couldn't help but notice that his eyes lingered on her a little longer than usual. His questions were indirect at first, casual observations about her lack of social engagement, her cold demeanor, the fact that she seemed to always be several steps ahead in their exercises. But over time, his probing became more direct. "Clara," he asked one day during a break between drills, "why don't you ever join us for the downtime activities? You know, the games, the talks. It's like you're always in your own world. What's really going on with you?" Clara forced a smile, keeping her voice steady, even though she could feel the rising tide of unease in her stomach. "Just focused on the training, Victor. You know how it is. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to be the best." Victor didn't seem convinced, but he didn't push her further, at least not then. But Clara could sense his suspicions growing. It wasn't just him. Other recruits were beginning to ask similar questions. The whispers were subtle at first, but they were there. She was being scrutinized, observed, her every action and word under the microscope. It didn't take long for Clara to realize that her behavior was no longer as subtle as she had hoped it would be. The true obstacle wasn't just the enemies she was preparing to face. It was the distrust from her peers, the growing suspicion that threatened to unravel everything. If anyone discovered the truth, her mission would be compromised. Clara was being torn between the need to maintain her cover and the rising pressure from those around her who were beginning to see through her act. She could no longer afford to ignore the discomfort in the air. The walls were closing in. Even the officers began to notice the subtle change in her behavior. Captain Lemos, a sharp and calculating man who had always watched her with a quiet intensity, was the first to directly confront her. He had been observing Clara for months, noting her exceptional performance, her ability to perform under extreme stress, and the way she always seemed to be one step ahead. But something about her behavior was unsettling, something he couldn't put his finger on. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, Captain Lemos called her into his office. The room was cold and sterile, with nothing but a single light casting long shadows across the walls. He motioned for Clara to sit. "Clara," he began, his voice low and steady, "I've been watching you. You've been performing exceptionally well, better than anyone here, but you've been distant, too, detached. What's going on with you? I'm not asking about your performance. I'm asking about you, the person behind the soldier." Clara froze, the weight of his words sinking in. She had trained herself for years to suppress her emotions, to keep everything under control. But this was different. She couldn't hide anymore. She couldn't pretend. She took a deep breath and met his gaze, maintaining her calm exterior. But deep inside, a storm was brewing. "I'm just focused on the mission, Captain," she replied, her voice steady but betraying a flicker of tension. "There's no room for distractions. You know how it is." Captain Lemos didn't blink. He stared at her, as if searching for something beneath the surface. "The mission, huh? You're not the only one here on a mission, Clara, but you're Acting like you're preparing for something, bigger. Something I'm not seeing. Clara's pulse quickened. She knew he wasn't asking just about her performance. He was onto her. The facade was starting to crumble. I'm here to serve, Captain, just like everyone else, she said, trying to sound as normal as possible, even though her words felt hollow in her own mouth. The silence stretched between them for a long moment, and Clara could feel the tension in the room thickening. Captain Lemos wasn't convinced, but he let her go without further questions, though his gaze lingered long after she left the room. For Clara, it was a moment of truth. She had been able to mask her true purpose for so long, but now, it seemed, that everyone around her was beginning to notice the cracks. The distrust from her fellow soldiers and the growing wariness from her superiors were no longer something she could ignore. Every decision she made had to be calculated, every action thought through. She had to remain vigilant, not just against the enemies lurking in the shadows, but against the very people she was training with. They were becoming more aware of her, and that made the stakes higher than ever. The path ahead was becoming more dangerous, not just because of the mission itself, but because of the obstacles Clara faced in maintaining her cover. Her ability to navigate this delicate balance would determine the success of the mission. The question was, could she keep it together long enough to complete what she had started? Or would the growing distrust around her be the very thing that brought everything crashing down? It was a day like no other, but Clara could feel the change in the air. Something big was coming, and she could sense that everything in her training, everything in her mission, was about to take a drastic turn. She had spent months, even years, in the dark, not fully knowing what her purpose was, constantly preparing for a mission that seemed to stretch just out of her reach. But now, as she stood in a briefing room surrounded by high-ranking officers and a select group of specialists, she knew that the time for secrets was over. The room was thick with tension, the air buzzed with anticipation as Clara took her place among the others. The familiar faces around her now felt distant, as though she was stepping into a world she no longer truly belonged to. The officers spoke in hushed tones, and the group fell into an expectant silence. Everyone knew something important was about to be revealed, but no one seemed prepared for what was coming. General Costa, a figure known for his stern leadership and calm demeanor, stood at the front of the room. His eyes scanned the group as he cleared his throat. His presence commanded attention, and as he spoke, his voice carried the weight of the moment. Clara, he began, his gaze now fixed on her. Today, everything changes. What you are about to learn is the truth behind your training, your mission, and why you've been here all along. It's time for you to understand your true role. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had been in this world of secrecy for so long, operating without fully knowing what lay ahead. The past months of preparation, the training she had endured, the sacrifice she had made, all of it had led to this moment. But now, with the truth about to be revealed, she wasn't sure what to expect. The mission you were trained for, the general continued, his voice steady, is not what you were told. It's far more dangerous, far more critical than anything you could have imagined. You were selected not because of your failure on the final test, but because we knew you were exactly the person we needed. You were chosen for something greater, something that no one else here could handle. Clara stood still, her mind racing. The general's words struck her like a lightning bolt, and a sense of unease began to grow within her. Chosen for something greater, something no one else could handle. The weight of those words settled deep within her chest. She had always believed that her failure was the end. It felt like a betrayal, but now, it was becoming clear that it was all part of a much larger plan. General Costa stepped forward, his expression unyielding. Clara, you were selected for an operation, so secret, so critical, that not even your fellow recruits could know. This mission is not just about defeating an enemy on the battlefield. It's about protecting the very fabric of our security, the future of global stability. You will be tasked with infiltrating an organization so deeply embedded within world governments and military operations that no one could have suspected its existence. The gravity of his words hit Clara like a physical blow. She had spent so much time focusing on the idea of failure and rejection that she had never once questioned the true purpose behind her selection. But now, the pieces were falling into place. Her rejection from the final test hadn't been a failure at all. It had been a calculated decision, a means of testing her, of preparing her for the mission ahead. You will be going up against an enemy that no one truly understands, the general continued. This organization operates from the shadows, manipulating governments, corporations, and even intelligence agencies. Their reach is vast, and their influence insidious. Your job is to dismantle them quietly, efficiently, without leaving a trace. This will not be a mission of glory. It will be one of secrecy, of shadows, and of sacrifice. Clara's thoughts swirled as the enormity of the task began to sink in. This was what she had been training for all along, but now that she understood the stakes, she couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility bearing down on her. She wasn't just a soldier anymore. She was an agent, a key player in a global game of espionage, deception, and survival. The lives of countless people depended on her success, and that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. General Costa continued outlining the mission's specifics, but Clara's mind was reeling. This wasn't just about her. This was about the fate of the world, and yet, even as the truth about her mission unfolded, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been part of something far greater than herself. She had been tested, shaped, and prepared for this exact moment. Everything in her life had led her to this point, as the general's briefing came to an end. Clara stood at the center of the room, her head spinning, her heart racing. She had known, deep down, that there was something more to her mission than anyone had let on. But now, as the truth finally came to light, she realized that everything she had endured, every obstacle she had faced, had been for this moment. Her training had never been about her performance on the final test. It had been about her ability to face the unknown, to carry the weight of a mission that no one else could handle. And now, with the truth revealed, Clara was ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. The room was filled with a new sense of purpose. Clara wasn't just another soldier. She was the key to a mission that would define the future. And as she stood there, surrounded by the officers who had been watching her all along, she knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back. This was her moment. And the world would soon know exactly what she was capable of. The truth had finally been revealed. Clara's life, her training, her sacrifices, all of it now made sense in a way that it never had before. As the room filled with a sense of finality, Clara felt a shift deep within herself. She had always thought of her journey as a series of tests, a battle against failure. But the truth, now laid bare before her, showed her that everything she had endured, every ounce of doubt, every moment of pain, had been leading her to this pivotal moment. The mission she was about to embark on wasn't just a job. It was the culmination of years of preparation, of careful training, and of making choices that no one else could even begin to understand. Clara had been chosen for this moment, not because she was the most physically skilled or the fastest, but because she had the strength to carry the weight of responsibility that came with the truth of the mission. And now, with the knowledge of what lay ahead, she understood that her mission wasn't just to protect the world, it was to redefine her very concept of success and failure. As Clara stood in the midst of the officers who had briefed her, the weight of their words slowly sank in. She wasn't here to be a hero, to be celebrated. She wasn't even here to succeed in the conventional sense. No, the real test was in knowing when to act, when to make decisions with the power to change everything. Her journey was never meant to be about accolades or recognition. It was about understanding that failure, as she had known it, was not an end but a beginning. The moment she was rejected from the final test, she had thought it was the ultimate defeat. The word fail had echoed in her mind as if it were a judgment of her entire existence. But now, she understood. That moment of failure had been carefully orchestrated, a step in the preparation for something far more significant. Her failure wasn't the end of her story. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter, one where every setback, every challenge, would build her into the person who could make the hard decisions, the impossible choices, when it mattered most. Clara thought back to the isolation she had felt during her training. The times when she wondered if she had made the right choice, when she questioned whether she could keep pushing through the exhaustion, the loneliness, the fear. But it was in those very moments of uncertainty that she found her strength. She wasn't just training to be a soldier, she was training to become someone who could look fear in the eye and push forward despite it. The revelation that she was part of something much bigger than herself had shifted everything. She was no longer just a soldier in a training program. She was the key player in a global mission that required more than just physical strength. It required mental clarity, moral courage, and the ability to make decisions that others might not be capable of making. Clara realized that the true meaning of success wasn't about never failing. It was about what you did after you fell. It was about getting back up, learning from the past, and pushing forward, no matter how uncertain the path ahead might be. And so, Clara stepped into her new role with a sense of quiet resolve. She understood now that the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. This wasn't just about defeating an enemy or completing a mission, it was about the survival of something much greater. The true mission wasn't something written down in reports or spoken about in classified meetings. It was a test of character, of resilience, and of the ability to take on a responsibility that no one else could. As Clara prepared for the final stage of her journey, she felt a profound sense of purpose. The sacrifices, the isolation, and the hardship had all led to this moment. The doubts that once clouded her mind were now gone, replaced by a sense of clarity and confidence. She had been chosen for this, not in spite of her failures, but because of them. Her story was not one of flawless victories, but one of learning, adapting, and persevering. Clara had failed, and yet she had found victory in her struggle. She had been tested, and she had emerged stronger, more capable, and more ready than ever to face what lay ahead. The true meaning of success was no longer a single victory or accomplishment, but the journey itself, the willingness to rise above every obstacle and keep fighting for the greater good. Message for the audience. Clara's story is a powerful reminder that failure is not the end. It's a stepping stone on the path to something bigger. We all face moments of doubt, of struggle, but it's how we rise from them that defines us. Don't give up when things get tough. The true victory lies in perseverance, in choosing to move forward even when the odds are against you. If Clara's journey inspired you, if you've ever felt like your own struggles were holding you back, remember, the path to success is rarely straight, but with determination, you can turn any setback into a new beginning. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales of triumph, resilience, and transformation. Let's continue this journey together, because victory is always closer than it seems.